One of the most famous examples of this theory that people are fundamentally selfish in literature is the book Lord of the Flies by William Golding. So many people have read it, right? Millions of kids around the globe were basically forced to read it in school. I read it when I was 16 years old or 17, and I remember feeling quite depressed and cynical afterwards and thinking, well, no more Harry Potter for me. But it was while I was researching this book that I thought, has it ever happened that real kids shipwrecked on a real island? And how would they behave if something like that would happen? And so I went on this journey that started on an obscure blog where someone wrote that this actually happened near Tonga in the 60s. Tonga is an island group in the Pacific Ocean. And after a couple of months, I managed to track them down. So I found a guy named Peter Warner, who was an Australian captain, who was fishing in the vicinity of an island called Ata, a small island, basically a rock that sticks out of the ocean, in 1966, when suddenly he heard screaming. And he was looking through his binoculars and he saw these 6 kids, long hair, pretty wild appearance. What happens if you live on an island for a long time. Then these kids came and said, you know what, we're part of this school in Tonga. We've been living here for 15 months. Can you bring us home? Now, Peter didn't believe it, so he called with the school and they said, yeah, actually, funerals have already been held. These are the real kids. So I spoke to Peter, the captain, and he put me in contact with his best friend, Mano Totau, who's one of the original Lord of the Flies kids. And so 50 years had passed since then, but they could still describe to me in vivid detail what happened and how these kids survived on this island for 50 months. Well, by working together, by cooperating. So they worked in teams of 2 to be on the lookout, to tend to the fire, to tend to the garden. And sometimes they did end up in fights. So then one of the boys would go to one side of the island, the other would go to the other side of the island, would cool off a little bit, come back and say sorry. That's how they kept going for months. So it wasn't easy, but they made it. And I think that can give us hope. And the thing is, if it would be a Hollywood story, a Hollywood movie, then people would say, well, this is very naive. That's not how kids would behave. It's very sentimental. But it's the real Lord of the Flies. The real Lord of the Flies is a story of friendship, of home, of working together. It's pretty much the opposite of what we've always heard. Now, I'm not saying it's a scientific experiment. It's obviously just an anecdote. But we humans tend to become the stories that we tell ourselves. And for decades, we've been telling ourselves this pretty cynical story of kids turning on one another. And what are kids supposed to learn from that? It's not a very happy message, is it? So I think that whenever any teacher says to the kids, well, you need to read Lord of the Flies, then let's also tell them about the one time that we know of in all of world history where real kids shipwrecked on a real island, because that's a very different story. I think that most people are, in fact, pretty decent, and there's very strong evidence for this. It was already Charles Darwin a long time ago in the 19th century, the father of evolutionary theory, who noticed that domesticated species have certain things in common. They talk about domestication syndrome. So what does that mean? Well, domesticated species have thinner bones, smaller brains, they often have floppy ears, but most importantly, they just look a little bit childish. It's as if they never really grow up. We now also know which genes are associated with domestication. And then the interesting thing is, if you indeed look at this list, and if you then look at humans, then the evidence is pretty clear. We all are also domesticated. And we did this in a process that biologists call survival of the friendliest. So for a very long time, it was actually friendliness that helped you to survive. Imagine living in the Ice Age, being a nomadic hunter-gatherer. What did you need most? Well, you needed friends. You weren't going to survive without friends because, there could be a tough day, you could get an injury or something like that, and then you really needed those friends. So friendliness was sort of an evolutionary advantage, an evolutionary adaptation. And there was a very strong strong pressure, selection pressure, so that we became friendlier and friendlier and friendlier. And you can even see this within our bodies. So if you compare bodies of humans from 50,000 years ago and 40 and 30 and 20 and 10,000 years ago, you just see that people look more puppyish than we used to, right? So I call this Homo puppy. We've evolved to become more puppyish. We just look friendlier. We have these smaller skulls, for example. And we also developed the unique ability to blush. I think that's really striking and fascinating that we're one of the only species in the whole animal kingdom with the ability to blush. We involuntarily give away our feelings in order to establish trust. And we also have unique eyes. So this is what we call cooperative eyes. As you can see, I have white sclera, the white around our irises. Now, that doesn't make me unique. All humans have that. But it makes us unique as a species because all other primates don't have it. They have dark around their eyes. So that makes it very hard to track their gazes, to follow their gazes. It makes it hard to see what they're looking at. It's as if other primates are a little bit like poker players wearing shades, or mafiosi, wearing shades. And we are just an open book for everyone. We just give away what we're looking at to each other. And again, that helps us to establish trust. I mean, think about what love and romance would be if we can't look each other in the eye. If you want the evidence that we have really evolved to cooperate as a species, just look in the mirror and you see it staring right at you.